The tension didn't start with the equation. It started with the assumption. The old floorboards inside Carden Hall groaned beneath the pressure of polished shoes and stale egos. Walls lined with framed portraits of academic elitists, mathematicians with golden plaques, stared down from above like judges. At the center of it all, a whiteboard filled with symbols, a crowd of graduate students holding back yawns and laughter, and a single man seated in the back row who didn't belong. Jason Statham didn't come to be noticed, but his presence had a weight classrooms weren't built to hold. No one knew why he was there, dressed in a simple black jacket, scuffed boots, no name tag, no laptop. The others had assumed he was some maintenance guy who wandered in by mistake, until he stayed and listened, until he didn't fidget, until he didn't blink when the professor took the stage and dismissed half the audience with a glance. Professor Alton Wexler was the kind of man who used math as a scalpel, not to solve, but to separate. He didn't teach, he dissected. He didn't challenge minds, he humiliated them. And he loved it. Jason watched him move crisp, arrogant steps, voice sharpened for authority, eyes that had spent years looking down on people. The kind of man who didn't need to shout to make others feel small. The kind of man who once walked away from a classroom after reducing a PhD student to tears and was congratulated for it. Today's topic was nonlinear optimization in discrete systems. The kind of math that sounded like code to the uninitiated. The kind of math that made half the students nod as if they understood, when in truth they were drowning. But Jason wasn't here for the curriculum. He was here because of his son. 1 week earlier, Evan had come home silent. No bruises, no complaints. Just that distant kind of stillness Jason recognized too well. A storm not expressed, only stored. After hours of quiet, Jason had found the crumpled sheet in the trash. A worksheet. A failed quiz. A red circle around a problem with a note scribbled in the corner. Try acting your level. Below that, another hand had written, or leave this to the thinkers. Jason didn't need context. He knew shame when he saw it, and he knew who wrote those notes, because at the bottom of the page in faint pencil, Evan had tried to erase a single name, Wexler. Jason never said a word. He just made a plan. And now he was sitting in the back row, the lights overhead humming, the chalk screeching across the board as Professor Wexler began his signature performance, challenging the class with a fun little warm-up. Except it wasn't fun, and it wasn't little. It was a problem designed to overwhelm, one that required 3 layers of abstraction, complex multivariate mapping, and a touch of intuition that most of the students didn't have yet. The room grew quiet as students fidgeted. Pens stopped moving. Someone tried to whisper an approach and was immediately silenced by a glare from the front. Jason watched the fear set in, not fear of being wrong, but of being noticed. Professor Wexler scanned the rows, eyes like scalpels again until they stopped. They didn't stop on a student. They stopped on Jason, the man in the back who hadn't written anything, who didn't look nervous, who looked calm. That calm was an offense. So Wexler turned to the board and wrote another problem, more complex. The kind of equation that should have been reserved for research labs, not warm-ups. And then he gestured without words to Jason. The room turned. Jason didn't flinch. He stood slowly, like he'd just finished a meal and didn't see what all the fuss was about. Walked forward. Picked up the chalk like it was a trigger he'd used before. And stared at the board. He didn't start writing immediately. He read it like you read a map of old terrain. Then with deliberate clarity he began to solve, not with arrogance, with fluency. Each line was careful, crisp, and faster than it should have been. Students leaned forward. The silence changed shape. It became respect wrapped in confusion. The problem unraveled in less than 2 minutes. Not only solved, but rewritten cleaner. Jason underlined the final answer. Then set the chalk down like it was made of glass. He turned, walked back to his seat. No flourish, no nod, just presence. The professor didn't speak. He stared at the board, then rewrote the equation, harder, messier, designed to trick intuition. Jason didn't rise this time. He looked at the board once, then sat still, and a student, one brave enough to ask, raised her hand and asked if the previous solution had been correct. Professor Wexler didn't answer, because he knew it was, but admitting it would undo something, and Jason didn't care. Because he wasn't there for applause. He was there to finish something left incomplete, something the professor didn't know had already begun the moment he mocked the wrong boy in front of the wrong father. Professor Alton Wexler had faced critics before, rival scholars, bitter postgrads, even a few failed thinkers who tried to discredit his theories at conferences. But none of them ever made him feel small, until Jason Statham. He wouldn't admit it, not aloud, but the precision of that solution still echoed in his skull. The simplicity, the confidence, the silence. Jason had solved the problem like a man folding a shirt neat, fast, and without ceremony. And now the students were whispering. Not openly, not loudly. But he heard it. That wasn't just a good answer, they said. That was mastery. So Professor Wexler tried again. He called it a bonus round. Said it was a curveball pulled straight from the cutting edge of data topology. A nightmare for anyone without a PhD. He stared straight at Jason Statham as he said it. Jason didn't move, didn't even blink. One of the braver students, a woman named Nina, glanced toward him, then toward the board and raised her hand. "I think I know how to start," she said. Wexler frowned. He hadn't been expecting that. "Then come up and show us," he said, gesturing. She stepped forward, started outlining the early transformation. It was solid, careful, but halfway through she hesitated, eyes flicking across the last term in the equation. She bit her lip. Jason Statham's voice cut through the room. "Calm. Even, you skipped the constraint." Nina looked back, startled. Professor Wexler turned sharply. "Mr. Statham, this is a student exercise," he said. "If you'd like to take over, you're welcome to step forward." Jason rose, no hesitation. He didn't look at the board, he looked at Nina. "You were close. You just forgot the bounding interval on the second function. Watch." He reached for the chalk. The next 2 minutes unfolded like choreography. Jason didn't rewrite Nina's work. He built on it, showed her where her logic bent too far and where it could be tightened. Used her own symbols, honored her structure, but clarified the blind spots. When he finished, the problem didn't just have a solution, it had a story. The board looked like a sentence spoken in fluent mathematics. Nina's eyes widened. She understood it. Completely. Professor Wexler didn't speak. He couldn't, because he recognized what had just happened. Jason hadn't come to show off. He came to teach, but not the kind of teaching you can find in books. This was experience. Life. Pattern recognition layered over instinct. Jason had just walked into the heart of an elite academic arena and handed them something they'd never been given before: grace. The class began to shift. Students no longer looked at Wexler for the next move. They looked at Jason Statham. That's when Wexler snapped. "You seem to be enjoying yourself," he said, voice cold. Jason didn't reply. Wexler walked to the board and erased everything, even Nina's work. Then he wrote something new, bigger, messier. A problem pulled from a paper he'd co-authored 10 years ago, unsolved even now. "Then solve this," he said, stepping back. Jason stepped forward once, stopped, then turned to the class. "What's the point?" The room froze. "You keep throwing problems at me," he said. "Harder, uglier, more obscure. But that's not why you teach, is it?" Wexler's lips parted, but no words came. Jason continued. "Teaching isn't about proving you're the smartest one in the room. It's about making others realize they are." He handed the chalk to Nina. "Take a crack at it. I'll help if you get stuck." Nina hesitated, then stepped forward. Together they began, piece by piece, angle by angle, Jason guiding, Nina asking questions. Other students started to lean forward, whisper suggestions. Then they stood, one by one, coming closer to the board, joining. What began as an ambush turned into a workshop. Jason never raised his voice, but his presence became the center of the room. Professor Wexler stood still, watching it happen, the loss of gravity, the shift in authority. His voice, once feared, now ignored, and then someone knocked on the door. It was Evan, Jason's son. The professor blinked, surprised. Evan stepped in slowly, holding a folder in his hand, quiet, but sure. Jason gave him a single look. Evan nodded, then walked to the front of the room. He opened the folder, pulled out a single page. It was the same worksheet from a week ago. Still crumpled, still bruised. Evan turned it around and placed it next to the board. The students saw it. "Read the red circle. Read the words. Try acting your level." Silence. Jason's voice followed. "That's what started all this." Professor Wexler looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Jason didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stepped beside his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't break people to test their limits," he said. "You lift them." The lecture hall stayed frozen. Because in that moment, nobody saw an outsider anymore. They saw the only real teacher in the room. The university issued no statement. They didn't need to. Because the footage spread without them, quiet cell phone clips, TikToks, blurred screenshots of the chalkboard equation with captions like, "Is this Jason Statham teaching quantum variables?" It wasn't meant to go viral. It wasn't a stunt. It was what happens when truth enters a room too small to contain it. In the days that followed, emails flooded the department, some praising Jason Statham's approach, some demanding Wexler's resignation. One was from a 17-year-old high school girl who wrote, "I stopped liking math when my teacher made me feel stupid. But seeing you stand there with your son made me want to try again." Jason didn't answer the messages. He didn't need to, because none of this was about him. Not really. It was about a boy who walked into a classroom with a dream and got broken for it. It was about a woman who'd been made to feel like her questions weren't welcome, until someone quietly handed her the chalk. It was about power, and the illusion that authority always equals truth. Professor Wexler didn't resign, but something in him shifted. His next lecture opened not with arrogance but apology. He didn't name Jason Statham, but he didn't have to. The class noticed his tone had changed, so had his posture. He stopped calling on students only by GPA. He stopped treating humility like weakness, and once, just once, when a freshman hesitated to speak, Wexler said gently, "There are no wrong voices in the room, just ones we haven't listened to yet." Jason didn't return to campus, but Nina did. She joined a graduate mentorship group, got recruited into an advanced cryptography seminar. Later that semester, she was offered a research assistantship, not because of her GPA, but because of the way she thought when no one else had answers. Evan, Jason Statham's son, healed slowly. The cast came off, the bruises faded. But something deeper stayed, not bitterness, but clarity. He understood now why his father didn't speak unless it mattered, why control wasn't about silence, but about knowing exactly when to make noise. One afternoon, Evan asked Jason Statham why he didn't just destroy Wexler with a cleaner solution, a faster answer, a mic drop moment. Jason paused, then said, "Because sometimes showing what's possible is louder than proving someone wrong." That line stuck. Evan wrote it down, not to post, just to remember. 2 months passed. Then one evening, Jason Statham received a letter, handwritten, from Professor Wexler. It didn't open with "Dear." It didn't end with "Sincerely." It just read, "There are moments that divide who we were from who we could be. That day was mine. Thank you." Jason folded the letter once, slid it into a drawer, didn't tell anyone. The world didn't need to know he'd won, because it was never a fight, it was a reset. And sometimes the most powerful correction doesn't sound like a shout, it sounds like a solution.